You shouldn't be out here alone. Leo's voice was low but firm, cutting through the hissing of the cold, relentless rain on the asphalt. This isn't a safe place for anyone at 2 in the morning. The girl spun around, startled. Strands of dark silk were plastered to her porcelain skin, and her eyes, wide and wild like a cornered fawn's, darted around the empty, menacing street before landing on him. "I don't need your pity," she snapped, her voice as brittle as ice. Leo took a half step closer, but no more. He was still in his city sanitation uniform, the reflective stripes catching the faint, sickly glow of the streetlight. "I'm not offering pity," he said, his tone even. "I'm offering a roof, one with heat and without strangers holding knives." She hesitated, her pride warring with the tremor in her lips that wasn't just from the cold. He saw the way her gaze flickered toward the dark mouth of the alley nearby, as if she were expecting someone. "What happened?" he asked, his voice gentler this time. Her eyes fell to the wet pavement. "I was robbed," she stammered, the words fragmented. "My phone, my bag, it's all gone." Leo let the silence hang for a moment, the only sound the drumming of the rain. He was a single father. He had a 6-year-old daughter, Maya, sleeping safely at home, and his every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to not invite risk into their lives. But something in the defiant set of her shoulders, a pride that had no business being there amidst such fear, made him act. "All right," he said, the word final. He adjusted the strap of his work bag. "I live 2 blocks from here. It's not much, but it's warm. The couch is yours for the night." She looked like she might argue again, her pride making a last stand, but a slight buckle in her knees betrayed her. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible. They walked in a silence heavy with unspoken questions, Leo keeping a respectful but watchful distance. When they reached his small duplex, he unlocked the door and gestured for her to enter. The warmth of the house washed over them, smelling of laundry soap and cinnamon. It was small and humble, but immaculately clean. A tower of colorful building blocks stood in one corner, and a tiny pink jacket hung on a hook by the door. "You can leave your shoes there," he said, pointing to a mat. "The couch is all yours. There's a spare blanket in that closet." She simply nodded, her eyes taking in the quiet safety of the room as she wiped the rain from her cheeks with her sleeve. Leo walked toward the back of the house to check on his daughter, leaving the stranger to the silence and the warmth. He went into a small back room, cluttered with storage boxes, and placed his wallet and keys in a locked drawer, an unconscious ritual of a man who knew the world wasn't always kind. He returned a moment later with a thick blanket, a clean towel, and a dry grey sweatshirt that would be far too large for her. "Bathroom's on the right," he said, handing the bundle to her. "You can shower if you want. The water takes a minute to get warm." She took the items with both hands, her eyes finally flickering up to meet his, confused by his quiet, no-nonsense demeanor. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the question sharp with suspicion. Leo rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of weariness. "Because my mother taught me you don't walk past someone shivering in the rain," he said simply. "It's as simple as that." The girl seemed to flinch at the mention of a mother, but said nothing, disappearing into the bathroom. While she was gone, Leo scribbled a quick note, placed it on the coffee table beside a steaming mug of water he'd heated in the microwave, and then, as quietly as he could, vanished down the hallway into the bedroom he shared with his daughter. Clara emerged 20 minutes later, wrapped in the oversized sweatshirt that smelled faintly of him, of soap and rain and hard work. The house was silent. On the small table next to the couch sat the neatly folded blanket, the mug of warm water, and the note written in a steady, blocky script. "If you need to call anyone, the landline is on the wall. The closet has more blankets. Please keep the door to the hallway closed. My daughter is a light sleeper." She stared at the note for a long moment, her fingers resting on the edge of the warm cup. The heat seeped through the ceramic into her skin, and for the first time all night, she felt the loosening of a knot she hadn't realized was clenched deep in her chest. Safe. The man who had taken her in hadn't asked for her name or offered his. He hadn't made her feel small or indebted or judged. She didn't know who he was, but as she curled onto the couch and pulled the blanket over her shoulders, that didn't seem to matter. Clara woke to the sound of laughter, light, high-pitched and unmistakably a child's. For a moment, she was completely disoriented. The soft blanket was wrapped around her, the air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, and the low murmur of cartoons played in the background. It was a world away from the cold, terrifying chaos of the night before. She sat up slowly, blinking against the soft morning light filtering through the blinds. Across the small living room, a little girl with a halo of wild, dark curls sat cross-legged on the carpet, completely absorbed in building a precarious, rainbow-colored tower of plastic blocks. The little girl's curls bounced as she giggled to herself, seemingly unaware of Clara's awakening. "Good morning," Clara said gently, her voice raspy from sleep. The child looked up, her dark eyes lighting up with cheerful curiosity. "Hi, you're the sleepy lady from the couch. Daddy said you were a princess who lost her castle in the rain. Is that you?" Clara blinked, taken aback by the innocent fantasy. A genuine smile, her first in what felt like days, touched her lips. "I guess that is me," she chuckled. "It's nice to meet you." "My name's Maya," the girl said proudly. A man's voice called from the other room. "Maya, my trusty co-chef, to the kitchen. The toast isn't going to burn itself." Maya giggled again and scampered toward the kitchen. Clara stood, stretched, her body still sore, and slowly followed the sound of laughter, feeling drawn to it. She stepped into the small kitchen to find Leo cracking eggs into a bowl, stirring something in a pan on the stove. "You cook?" she asked, a note of surprise in her voice. Leo glanced over his shoulder. "Only if Maya is brave enough to eat it," he said with a wry grin. "Want to risk it?" Clara hesitated. "I can try, though I should warn you I'm not very domestic." He passed her a whisk and smiled. "Neither am I. That's why a lot of toast gets burned in this house." She laughed, the sound surprising even herself. Together, they moved around the small, warm kitchen. Maya climbed onto a stool to diligently butter slices of bread, while Clara attempted to manage the scrambled eggs. Of course, she messed up. The spatula slipped, and the bowl tipped, splattering a portion of the egg mixture across the counter and onto the floor. "Oh no!" Clara gasped, mortified. She reached for a towel, but Maya beat her to it, handing her a paper towel with a comforting grin. "It's okay. Daddy spills stuff all the time too." Clara stared at the little girl for a moment, then burst into genuine, unrestrained laughter. Leo said nothing, just smiled as he quietly wiped up the mess. When they finally sat down to their slightly subpar, but bravely made breakfast, Clara looked nervously at the plate in front of Leo. The eggs were a little overcooked, the toast a bit dark at the edges. Still, he ate every bite. "This is great," he said, his face perfectly straight. "You don't have to lie," Clara replied, raising an eyebrow. "I'm not lying," Leo insisted. "It's edible. That counts." After the meal, Leo stood and collected the dishes. "You two relax, I've got this." Clara offered to help, but he waved her off. As she and Maya moved to the living room to build with her blocks, Clara glanced back and saw him stealthily pull another plate from the still warm oven. On it were perfectly fluffy scrambled eggs and lightly golden toast. He had cooked a separate, perfect batch for Maya, just in case. She said nothing, but a strange warmth spread through her chest. Later that morning, as Clara helped Maya build a lopsided Lego house, the little girl leaned in close, her eyes wide with a shared conspiracy. "The other eggs Daddy made," Maya whispered. "He saved a plate for you too. It's still in the oven, staying warm." Clara's eyebrows shot up. She stood, walked to the kitchen and leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. Leo looked up, caught mid-bite of a second, much fluffier plate of eggs. "So," she said, a playful smile touching her lips, "I burned breakfast." He had the good grace to look sheepish. "You cooked breakfast," he corrected gently. "That's the part that matters." "Why not just tell me?" He shrugged, setting his fork down. "Because trying is what counts. The result gets better with practice. But you have to be brave enough to try, and someone has to be brave enough to eat the first messy attempt." Clara looked at him for a long moment, and something in her chest shifted. He was unlike anyone she had ever met in her polished, transactional world. His kindness wasn't a performance. It was quiet, unconditional, and asked for nothing in return. It completely disarmed her. "You said something last night," she said softly, "about your mother. You learned well. You're a good father, Leo." He said nothing, just offered a small, private smile and returned to his eggs. Later, while washing the dishes, Leo spoke casually. "There's a laundromat down the block. The owner's a friend. I could ask if she needs an extra pair of hands, if you're staying in the city for a bit." Clara hesitated, drying a plate. "Maybe. I need to earn something while I wait for paperwork. I lost everything. ID cards, everything." She offered a partial truth. I was, an out-of-state student. It's complicated." Leo didn't pry. He just nodded, respecting the walls she still had up. "Well, the offer stands. Let me know if you want to check it out. I'll walk you over." Clara looked at him again. This man had no idea who she really was, and he didn't care. For the first time, she felt seen not for her family name or her bank account, but simply for the person standing in his kitchen, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. The bell above the laundromat door jingled as Clara stepped inside. The chaotic symphony of rattling dryers and the oppressive humidity hit her at once. The air smelled of harsh detergent and something sourly metallic. A gruff woman behind the counter barely looked up from her magazine. "You Leo's friend?" she asked. Clara nodded. The woman grunted and handed her a faded blue apron. "Clock starts now. Folding station is in the back." And just like that, she was working. By noon, Clara's back ached, and her knuckles were raw from soap and wrestling with damp sheets. 2 customers had already snapped at her. One accused her of losing a sock. Another handed her 3 overflowing bags of laundry and said, "I expect this folded by 5, before walking out without another word. She looked at the clock, only 3 hours in. By late afternoon, she stood in the alley behind the laundromat, slumped against the gritty brick wall. Her apron was stained, her cheeks flushed with heat and frustration. Her dead phone sat uselessly in her pocket. She stared at the dumpster across the alley, realizing with a sinking feeling that this was the first day in her entire life that no one cared about her name, her opinion, or her comfort. She was just a pair of hands. She stood there, watching the grimy water swirl down a drain, and considered walking away. Back to a shelter, back to the streets. Anything but this bone-deep exhaustion. When she returned to Leo's house that evening, she said nothing. She just dropped her bag by the door, sat on the edge of the couch, and pulled off her worn-out shoes, grimacing at the blisters forming on her heels. Leo noticed, but he didn't ask. The next morning, Clara woke to find a pair of clean, simple white sneakers by the door. No tag, no box, but they were obviously new. She picked one up. It was lightweight, sturdy, and looked to be exactly her size. Tucked inside, a small piece of paper was folded neatly. "I figured your feet deserved better. If you're going to walk away, at least don't walk in pain." She stood there for a long time, holding the shoes, the note a small warm weight in her hand. Then she put them on. When Leo returned from his night shift, she was in the kitchen already making toast. "You didn't leave," he observed, his voice tired but calm. "I almost did," she replied, gesturing with her head toward her new shoes. But your guilt-trip footwear worked. A rare smirk touched his lips. They weren't meant to guilt you. They were meant to say you have a choice. That's all. Later that week, after folding a seemingly endless mountain of hotel towels, she complained again. "I have never been this exhausted in my life," she muttered, rubbing the back of her neck. "And I used to think hot yoga was hard." Leo looked up from the laundry bag he was sorting. "You're earning something real now." She gave him a tired look. "You mean back pain?" "I mean the feeling of being tired for a reason," he said quietly. "It's a freedom no one can give you. You have to earn it for yourself." Clara didn't respond, but his words stayed with her. That Friday, the laundromat took on a large rush order for a local hotel. They had to wash, dry, and fold over 100 sheets and uniforms by morning. Clara stayed late to help Leo finish the job. They worked past midnight, the hum of the dryers a monotonous lullaby, the air thick with the scent of clean, hot cotton. Leo folded with an economical, practiced grace. Clara struggled to keep up, often unfolding and refolding the same fitted sheet 3 times. Around 2 a.m., they finally loaded the last of the clean laundry into the back of Leo's old pickup truck. "I can't feel my fingers," Clara groaned as she climbed into the passenger seat. "You'll miss them when they're gone," Leo replied dryly, starting the engine. They drove through the quiet, sleeping streets, the silence between them no longer awkward, but easy and companionable. At one stop, he handed her a small laundry bag. "Go leave this at the door. House number 15, the dark one with the broken porch light." Clara nodded and stepped out into the damp night air. She placed the bag on the stoop and turned back toward the truck. But just as she did, a shape detached itself from the shadows of the yard, a dark, muscular dog, bursting from behind the gate with a furious snarl and charging straight for her. A scream tore from Clara's throat as she stumbled backward, her ankle twisting sharply on the uneven curb. She hit the pavement hard, the brutal impact scraping the skin from her palms. The truck door slammed with a sound like a gunshot. Before the dog could reach her, Leo was already moving, sprinting toward her faster than she thought possible, his face a mask of fierce, protective fury. He reached her just as the dog skidded to a stop, barking wildly. Leo planted himself between them, arms out wide, and roared, "Get back, now!" The dog, startled by the sudden authority, retreated toward the yard with a final resentful bark. Before Clara could argue, Leo had scooped her into his arms. "I told you to wait in the truck," he snapped as he carried her back, his voice tight with an anger she'd never heard from him. "I thought I could handle a bag of laundry," she muttered, clutching her throbbing ankle. He set her down inside the cab with a gentleness that contradicted his tone and slammed the door. "Damn it, Clara," he said, rubbing a hand hard down his face. "I said to stay put." "It's just a scrape." "I don't care about the scrape," he cut in, his voice rough with an emotion she didn't recognize at first. "I care that you could have been seriously hurt. What were you thinking?" She had never seen him like this, angry, truly angry, but beneath the anger, pulsing like a raw nerve, was something else, pure, undiluted fear. She stared at him, and then her own eyes welled up with tears, not from the pain in her ankle, but from a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. "No one's ever yelled at me because they were scared for me," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. The tension in Leo's shoulders instantly eased. He sat back, the anger vanishing as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a weary surprise. "Well," he said quietly, "get used to it." Clara wiped at her cheeks and let out a wet, broken laugh. And in that moment, sitting in the cab of his beat-up truck, this place didn't feel like a stranger's house anymore. It felt like something else entirely, something like home. A few days later, Clara was folding towels behind the counter at the laundromat when it slipped out. A delicate gold chain, thin and elegant, with a single brilliant sapphire pendant that caught the bleak fluorescent light like a drop of blue flame. She had hidden it deep inside a pocket of her duffel bag, a final link to a life she was trying to forget, but it must have worked its way into the laundry. She froze the moment she saw it lying there, a star against the plain white cotton. Before she could snatch it up, Leo walked past, stopped, and looked down. His gaze landed on the necklace. The easy camaraderie they had built over the last week vanished in an instant. Slowly, he looked up at her, his face unreadable. She held her breath. "That," he said, his voice flat and cold, "is not something a broke-out-of-state student carries around." Clara's hand shot out, snatching the necklace and tucking it into her back pocket. "I forgot it was in there," she murmured, the lie flimsy and weak. "Who are you, Clara?" he asked, his voice quiet but demanding. The silence in the loud, rattling laundromat was suddenly deafening. I'm someone who ran away," she said finally, her voice trembling, "from a world where every smile has a price and every kindness is a transaction. I just wanted to breathe." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression hardening with a hurt she hadn't anticipated. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie, I left things out." "That's the same thing, Clara, and you know it." He took a step back, the distance between them feeling like a canyon. She turned away, her own hands trembling now. "Do you have any idea what it's like," she whispered, her back still to him, "to live a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels like a cage on the inside? And to be told who to love, where to go, what to become?" "No," Leo said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through her desperate explanation. "But I know what it's like to be honest with someone who isn't." They stood there in the humming silence of the laundromat, a new, painful distance between them. Clara felt tears rising, but stubbornly refused to let them fall. Before either could find more words, the door swung open with a jingle. A weaselly-looking man in a leather jacket and a ball cap walked in, holding up a smartphone. His eyes locked on Clara. "There she is," he muttered, raising his phone. A predatory burst of light flashed in her eyes. "You've been missing for 5 days, sweetheart. Your daddy's offering 6 figures for anyone who knows where you're hiding." Leo stepped forward instantly. "Hey, get out of here, now." "Relax, man, just doing my job," the man said, snapping another picture as he backed away. Panic bloomed in Clara's chest, cold and suffocating. Leo moved without thinking. He grabbed Clara by the arm, not hard, but with an undeniable urgency, and shoved her toward the back exit. "Go, now!" They burst out into the alley, their feet pounding on the wet pavement. He didn't stop running until they reached his truck, bundling her inside. "What about Maya?" Clara gasped, her mind spinning. "She's still at her after-school program. I'll get her." Within the hour, a confused and sleepy Maya was in her father's arms. Leo handed her a juice box and strapped her securely into the back seat. Clara watched in stunned silence as he drove, not home, but to the small house next door. His neighbor, a kind older woman named Mrs. Ramirez, opened the door before he could even knock. "She'll keep her safe," Leo said to Clara. "You trust her?" "With my life," he said, his tone absolute. Mrs. Ramirez, whom Maya called Nonna, nodded silently and ushered the little girl inside. "Come, Mija, I'll keep the little one." Leo leaned down and kissed Maya's forehead. "You'll stay with Nonna Ramirez for a little while, okay? Just like a sleepover." Maya nodded sleepily. "Okay, Daddy." Leo straightened, exhaled deeply, and turned to Clara. "Let's go." They drove out of the neighborhood, not speaking until they were on the edge of town. Guilt and gratitude battled in Clara's chest. As he kept one hand on the wheel, she noticed for the first time that his other shirt sleeve was torn, a dark bruise forming along his bicep. "Your arm," she said suddenly. "What happened?" He glanced down, unconcerned. "The guy with the camera pushed me when I blocked his shot." "Why didn't you say anything?" Leo shrugged, his eyes on the road. "As long as you and Maya are safe, a bruise is nothing." Clara looked at him, at his steady profile in the dim light of the dashboard, and her eyes welled with tears again. In that moment, she realized something profound. He wasn't protecting a millionaire's daughter. He was protecting her, a person. His quiet, steadfast decency was a shield more powerful than any bodyguard her father could hire. They returned to the house late that night, under the cover of darkness. Leo parked a block away, scanning the street for cars that didn't belong. When he turned to look at their small duplex, his body went tense. The porch light he always left on was off. Something was wrong. He motioned for her to stay in the truck, his voice a low command. "Wait here." But Clara had already opened her door. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm, filled with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. She met his gaze across the roof of the truck. "It's my life that followed us here, my trouble." She walked around to his side and stood beside him, looking toward the dark house. "I'm not hiding in the truck while you walk into it alone." They walked the final block together, a silent, united front. And then they saw it. A Blacktown car, silent and sleek like a predator, was idling in front of the driveway, gleaming under the lone streetlight. Two men in dark, impeccable suits stood like statues of intimidation by the porch. The front door of Leo's small house was ajar. Leo's pace quickened, instinct kicking in. He stepped in front of Clara protectively, just as a third man emerged from inside. He was older, tall, with a shock of silver hair combed perfectly back. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone sucked the air from the porch. "Clara," he said, his voice the sound of ice cracking. It was a command, not a greeting. "This foolishness is over. Get in the car." Clara froze, but Leo stood his ground. "You must be her father," he said, his voice level. "I am Winston Harrington," the man replied, his sharp eyes dismissing Leo entirely. "And you're the man who's been harboring my daughter." "I'm the man who gave her a safe place to sleep when she had nowhere else to go," Leo countered. Winston took a slow step forward, his gaze sweeping over the small duplex with open distaste. This place, this life. It's beneath her. You can't possibly think she belongs here. "This place is safe," Leo shot back, his voice low and steady. "And she was happy here. When was the last time you could say that?" He didn't back down. "I'm not keeping anyone, but I'm not handing her over like she's a piece of property either." Winston's eyes narrowed. "You don't know who she is." "I don't care who she is," Leo said, the words clean and sharp. "I know what kind of person she is, and I know she's safe with me." Clara stepped between them then, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "Dad, stop." "You've made your point, Clara," Winston said, gesturing to his men. "Now come home." "This is home," she whispered, the words barely audible. "No," he said, his tone absolute. "This is where you ran to. It is not where you belong." Leo turned to Clara, his eyes pleading. "You don't have to go." But she was already looking at the car, and he saw the fight drain out of her. Her eyes were wet with a truth he couldn't understand. "I think I do," she said, her voice breaking. The pressure wasn't a command he could hear. It was the unspoken weight of her entire life, the knowledge of what a man like her father could do to a man like Leo. She was leaving not because she was weak, but to protect him. She stepped back from him slowly, her gaze holding his for a last, heartbreaking moment. "I'm sorry," she said softly, before turning her back to him. He didn't follow. He couldn't. One of the men opened the rear door of the car. She got in without looking back. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, the sound of a vault being sealed. Leo stood on the porch as the car pulled away, its red taillights bleeding into the night until they were gone. His fists were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. The warmth and light that had filled his home for weeks felt like it was leaching out of him, leaving him cold in the damp night air. He didn't say a word. He just closed his front door and turned off the porch light, plunging the house back into darkness. The days that followed were quieter. Too quiet. Leo went through the motions. He clocked into his night shifts, pushed his broom down empty city blocks, and came home just before dawn to a house where the silence was now a presence, heavy and suffocating. But something in him had dulled. The light in the house felt dimmer. His eyes no longer lit up when Maya greeted him in the morning. His hands moved mechanically as he packed her lunch, brushed her hair, and walked her to school. He hadn't told her why Clara had gone, just that sometimes people have to leave, and that it wasn't because they didn't care. Maya didn't ask many questions, but she stopped humming when she played, and she started sleeping with the lights on. On the fourth day, she started coughing. At first, Leo brushed it off as a common cold, but then came the fever, then the chills, then a violent trembling that wouldn't stop, even under 3 blankets. By midnight, she was burning up. Leo carried her small, limp body in his arms to the truck, his own hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the ignition. At the hospital, the harsh, fluorescent lights made everything seem too white, too bright, too sterile. A nurse took Maya into triage while Leo paced the waiting area, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Finally, a woman at the admissions desk called his name. "We'll need a $6,000 deposit for admission and initial tests." Leo's blood ran cold. He opened his wallet, knowing it was pointless. He had just over $100. Can I set up a payment plan? I'll cover the rest, I just need a few days." The woman's expression was one of practiced sympathy. "Hospital policy is..." "Please," Leo's voice cracked, the sound of a desperate man breaking. "She's 6 years old. She can't stop shaking." He was still pleading when a quiet, firm voice cut through the air behind him. "I've got it." He turned. Clara stood there, her hair damp from the rain. Her simple but elegant coat a world away from the oversized sweatshirt she'd once worn. She walked past him and placed a platinum credit card on the counter. "Put everything under my name," she said, her voice full of a calm authority he'd never heard before. "Harrington, room fees, meds, tests, all of it." The receptionist typed quickly. "And your relationship to the patient?" Clara looked at Leo, her eyes locking with his for a long, meaningful moment. Then she turned back to the receptionist and said, "Yes, I'm family." Leo stood frozen as they led Maya to a private room. An hour later, after doctors had confirmed it was a severe viral infection, treatable but requiring close monitoring, Leo sat beside his daughter's bed, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. Clara entered quietly. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his voice was a low, rough whisper. "You didn't have to do that." She sat in the chair next to him. "I know," she said softly, "but I wanted to." He exhaled, a shaky, shuddering breath. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have been dragged back into this." Clara looked at Maya, sleeping with a slight frown on her fevered face, her small hand clutching the covers. "You didn't drag me in, Leo," she said, her gaze returning to him. "You showed me what a home was. I couldn't let you face this alone." He nodded slowly, the truth of her words settling over him. Then his voice dropped again, thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I know you don't owe me anything," he said, his eyes shining with unshed tears, "but thank you for coming back." Clara leaned back in the uncomfortable hospital chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. "You told me once," she said, her voice soft but clear, "that everyone deserves to walk away without pain." She turned to look at him, his face etched with exhaustion and relief. That goes for hearts too. They sat in the quiet of the room, the only sound, the steady, soft beeping of Maya's heart monitor. For the first time in days, Leo allowed himself to truly breathe, not just because his daughter was safe, but because the woman who had brought light back into his house had chosen to come back. Clara stood in the marble hallway of her father's penthouse, her practical sneakers silent on the polished floor. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a glittering, indifferent skyline. She wasn't here for the view. Winston Harrington sat at the head of a long glass table, reading the financial section of a newspaper, using it as a shield. He didn't grant her the courtesy of looking up when she entered. "I figured you'd be back once the dust settled," he said coolly. "I didn't come back, Dad," Clara replied, her voice steady. "I came to talk." Winston folded the paper with an exaggerated, deliberate calm. "You're living in a fantasy, Clara. Playing house with a man who cleans the city's trash for a living." Clara crossed her arms, unflinching. "That man saved my life." "From what?" he scoffed. "A little discomfort. You had everything, a future, security, a legacy, and you threw it away for him." "I didn't throw it away. I walked away," she corrected him. "There's a difference." Winston rose from his chair, his presence filling the sterile room. "You gave up a world of privilege to hide in a shoebox with a janitor." "He's not a janitor." Clara's voice didn't waver. "He's a father, a man who shows up every single day for his daughter, without fail. A man who taught me more about value in 3 weeks than this entire penthouse taught me in a lifetime." Winston's eyes narrowed. "You're choosing him. Over this. Over me." She looked him directly in the eye. "I'm choosing my life, my voice. And yes, I'm choosing the man who lives by his hands and his heart." His lips tightened. "You love him." It wasn't a question. "I do," she said, the words simple and solid. He exhaled sharply, as though the word itself had wounded him. He paced toward the window, his back to her. "This isn't some fairy tale, Clara. Love doesn't keep the heat on." Clara watched his rigid silhouette against the city lights. "No," she agreed softly, "it doesn't, but it keeps people warm." He turned sharply then, and for the first time she saw something other than anger or disappointment in his eyes. She saw fear. "You think he can protect you? Provide for you?" "He already has," she said. "Not with money. He protected me with dignity. He provided me with the truth." There was a long silence. Winston walked to the bar and poured himself a drink, his hand unsteady. "I never meant to be the villain in your story, Clara," he muttered, his voice quiet and defeated. Clara looked at the man who had given her everything but the one thing she needed. "I know," she said, her voice filled not with anger, but with a sad, final understanding. "You just got so busy building an empire, you forgot how to build a home." He stared down into his glass, the immense tension in his shoulders finally faltering. "He has something I don't," Winston admitted, the words quiet and bitter. Clara tilted her head, her gaze soft. "He has peace, Dad," she said gently. "He's not afraid of silence." She straightened up, her decision made and settled deep in her soul. "I'm going back now, to him, to the life I chose." She walked toward the grand, echoing doorway. "And this time, I'm not running away from something, I'm walking toward it." As she reached the door, his voice, rough with an emotion he couldn't name, stopped her. "Tell him," he hesitated. "Tell that man he's a lucky man." Clara turned back, a small, genuine smile on her face for the first time in his presence. "No," she said, "I'm the lucky one." And then she walked out into the rain, into the noise, into her real life. She didn't look back. The knock came just after sunrise. Leo was in the kitchen, carefully pouring pancake batter into the shape of a dinosaur, Maya's absolute favorite. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, expecting the mailman, or maybe Mrs. Ramirez from next door. He opened the door and froze. Clara stood on his porch, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her jacket damp with the morning dew. In her hands, she held a small brown paper bag. "For Maya," she said softly, "blueberry muffins, the real kind, no preservatives." Leo couldn't find a single word. "I'm not here to stay the night," she added quickly, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to stay forever, if you'll have me." He searched her face, looking for any hint of doubt, any shadow of her old life, but found none. "This house is small," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've slept in castles, Leo," Clara said, stepping closer until only a breath separated them. "But I've never woken up in a home, until yours." His eyes softened. "We don't have much." "I had everything," she repeated, her voice even gentler now, placing a hand on his arm. "I just didn't have this." A small voice interrupted them. "Clara?" They both turned to see Maya standing in the hallway, rubbing the sleep from her eyes and clutching a stuffed hedgehog. Clara knelt down, her eyes shining. "Hey, sunshine, I brought muffins." Maya ran into her arms, wrapping her tiny arms tight around her neck. "Are you staying forever this time?" she whispered into her shoulder. Clara looked up at Leo, over Maya's head. He met her gaze and gave a slow, certain nod. She smiled through her own tears, hugging the little girl closer. "Yeah, kiddo," she said, her voice full of peace. "Forever sounds good." 2 months later, on a crisp autumn Saturday, the local park was alive with the smell of fresh coffee and grilling tortillas. The old pickup truck of Leo had been converted into a weekend food stand, a hand-painted sign hanging from the side. The Sunrise Stand. It had been Clara's idea. Now she worked the griddle, flipping breakfast burritos, while Leo took orders, his easy smile making every customer feel like a regular. Maya, perched on a stool, was in charge of handing out napkins and stickers, a job she performed with immense pride. They didn't make a fortune, but they made enough. And more importantly, they were making a life together. Clara flipped a pancake and caught Leo watching her from across the small space, a look of pure, unadulterated happiness on his face. He smiled and mouthed the words, "Thank you." She grinned back, a genuine, radiant smile. For the first time in her life, she understood that you don't need a palace to feel like royalty. You just need a kingdom of the heart. Their story reminds us that the richest lives aren't measured in bank accounts, but in quiet moments of kindness, in the honesty of a shared meal, and in the courage to choose a simple truth over a gilded cage. Leo had nothing to offer her but a couch, a warm blanket, and a heart full of dignity. And in the end, that was everything she needed to finally find her way home.